Some men build walls to keep the world out. Cole Harrington built an empire instead. For 15 years, the Texas rancher has turned his Lone Star spread into one of the most successful cattle operations in the state. But success came at a price. He's never let anyone close enough to see the man behind the money. When a Christmas week blizzard strikes his remote ranch, Cole rides out to secure his prized stallion and discovers something that will change everything. Huddled against his calving barn, nearly frozen and abandoned by a touring bus, sits Ivy Brenner, a classically trained violinist, whose world has just collapsed around her. What starts as a simple act of kindness, offering shelter for one night, becomes something neither of them expected. But can a man who spent years protecting his heart risk opening it to a woman whose own life is falling apart? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind howled like a banshee across the Texas plains, driving snow so thick Cole Harrington could barely see his own gloved hands gripping the reins. His stallion, Thunder, pranced nervously beneath him, ears flicking at every gust that threatened to knock them both sideways. Cole had weathered plenty of storms in his 38 years, but this Christmas week blizzard was something else entirely, the kind that reminded a man just how small he really was against the fury of nature. Thunder's hooves crunched through the deepening drifts as they approached the calving barn, the structure's weathered red paint barely visible through the swirling white. Cole had built this barn himself 7 years ago, back when he'd first started expanding the Harrington Ranch beyond what his father had ever dreamed possible. Now it sat nearly a mile from the main house, a testament to both his ambition and his need to keep certain parts of his operation private. The stallion's sudden snort and sideways step made Cole tighten his grip on the reins. Thunder was spooked by something, and Thunder didn't spook easily. Cole squinted through the snow, trying to make out what had caught the horse's attention. At first, he thought it might be a coyote seeking shelter, or maybe one of his rescue. Horses had broken free from the far pasture. Then he saw it, a dark shape huddled against the barn's south wall, too still to be an animal. "Easy, boy," Cole murmured, dismounting with practiced ease despite the treacherous footing. His boots sank into snow that was already past his ankles and still falling hard. He approached the figure cautiously, his rancher's instincts warring. With something deeper, a recognition that what he was seeing wasn't right, wasn't safe. She was small. That was his first clear thought. Curled into herself like a child trying to disappear, wearing what looked like a thin wool coat that was nowhere near adequate for weather like this. Her hair was dark, made darker by the melting snow, and her skin had that pale, waxy look that made Cole's chest tighten with concern. He'd seen hypothermia before, knew the signs. "Ma'am?" His voice carried despite the wind, and she stirred slightly, lifting her head just enough for him to see her face. Even half-frozen and clearly in distress, she was beautiful, the kind of beauty that spoke of refinement, of a life lived far from ranch work and winter storms. Her eyes, when they focused on him, were the color of storm clouds, and held a wariness that went deeper than her current predicament. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible above the howling wind. "I didn't mean to trespass. I just needed—" Her voice trailed off as a violent shiver racked her frame. Cole didn't hesitate. He'd been raised better than to leave anyone out in weather like this, regardless of how they'd ended up on his property. Without a word, he shrugged out of his heavy ranch coat and draped it around her shoulders, then scooped her up as easily as he would a calf. She weighed almost nothing, and the way she didn't protest told him everything he needed to know about her condition. "We'll sort out the details later," he said, settling her across Thunder's saddle before swinging up behind her. "Right now, we need to get you warm." The ride back to the main house was a blur of wind and snow, made longer by his need to keep Thunder at a careful walk. The woman girl, really, though he guessed she was probably in her mid-20s, leaned against him without seeming to realize she was doing it, her body seeking warmth by instinct. Cole found himself acutely aware of her weight against his chest, the way her hair smelled faintly of something floral, despite everything she'd been through. The Harrington ranch house had been in his family for 3 generations, though Cole had made extensive renovations after his parents' death 15 years ago. What had been a modest two-story farmhouse was now a sprawling single-story home with soaring ceilings and walls of windows that showcased the rolling landscape. On clear days, you could see for miles in every direction. Tonight, the windows showed nothing but swirling white. Cole carried her through the mudroom and into the kitchen, setting her gently in one of the chairs at his breakfast table. She was shivering so hard now that the chair rattled against the hardwood floor. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, already moving to start coffee and gather what he'd need to treat her hypothermia. "Ivy," she managed through chattering teeth. "Ivy Brenner." "Well, Ivy Brenner, I'm Cole Harrington, and this is my ranch. Can you tell me how you ended up out there?" He kept his voice calm, professional, the way he would with a spooked horse. No sudden movements, no pressure. She was quiet. For so long, he wasn't sure she'd heard him. Then, in a voice that held more pain than any person should have to carry, she said, "My bus left me." Cole paused in his coffee preparations. "Your bus?" "The tour bus. We were traveling to Dallas for a Christmas concert series." The driver stopped. At that truck stop about 10 miles back, said he needed to chain up for the weather. "I got off to use the restroom, and when I came out..." She shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed both resignation and heartbreak. They were gone. Cole's jaw tightened. He knew the truck stop she meant. It was the last outpost of civilization before his ranch, and the next town was another 20 miles beyond his property. To leave someone stranded there in weather like this wasn't just cruel. It was potentially deadly. "What kind of tour?" he asked, setting a mug of hot coffee in front of her and wrapping her hands around it. "Classical music. I'm a violinist." She took a sip of the coffee and closed her eyes briefly. "Was a violinist? I'm not really sure what I am anymore." There was a story there. Cole could tell, but he'd learned long ago not to push for information people weren't ready to give. Instead, he focused on the immediate problem. "Do you have family I should call? Someone who'll be worried?" Ivy's laugh was bitter. "No one who'd care that I'm missing." The words hit Cole harder than they should have. He recognized the tone, the careful way she'd constructed the sentence to hurt herself more than inform him. It was the sound of someone who'd learned not to expect much from the people who were supposed to love them. "Well," he said finally, "you're here now, and you're safe. That's what matters." She looked up at him then, really looked, and Cole felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes held a vulnerability that made him want to promise her things he had no business promising. But there was strength there, too, the kind that came from surviving disappointments that should have broken a person. "I should go," she said, quietly. "Once the storm passes, I can call someone, find another way to Dallas." "In this weather, you're not going anywhere for at least a day or two," Cole replied, more gruffly than he'd intended. The thought of her leaving, of going back out into the world that had clearly been unkind to her, bothered him more than it should have. "You can stay in the guest room tonight. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Ivy studied his face, as if looking for the catch, the expectation that would come with his offer. Cole kept his expression neutral, though something about her wariness made his chest ache. "I don't have any money," she said finally. "I can't pay you. Did I ask you to?" She shook her head slowly, still watching him with those storm-gray eyes. "Then, don't worry about it." Cole turned back to the coffee pot, needing something to do with his hands. "Are you hungry?" The question seemed to surprise her. Yes. I haven't eaten since this morning." Cole nodded and began pulling ingredients from his refrigerator. He wasn't much of a cook, but he could manage a decent grilled cheese sandwich and some soup. As he worked, he found himself stealing glances at his unexpected guest. Ivy Brenner was a puzzle he hadn't asked for, and Cole had learned to be wary of puzzles. They had a way of becoming complicated, and Cole's life was already complicated enough. He'd built his success on keeping things simple, straightforward, predictable. He bought land, raised cattle, made money, and kept to himself. It was a good life, a safe life. But as he watched Ivy slowly thaw out at his kitchen table, her delicate hands wrapped around the coffee mug like it was a lifeline, Cole felt something he hadn't experienced in years: curiosity about another person. Not just professional curiosity, the kind that helped him read cattle buyers and land sellers, but genuine interest in who she was, what had brought her to his barn, and why someone with her obvious breeding and education was traveling alone on a tour bus with nowhere to go. "The soup smells wonderful," Ivy said softly, and Cole realized he'd been staring. "It's nothing fancy," he replied, ladling the tomato soup into a bowl. "Just something to warm you up." She accepted the bowl and sandwich with a gratitude that seemed disproportionate to the simple meal. When she took her first bite, she closed her eyes briefly, and Cole had to look away from the expression of pure relief on her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all of this." "I know you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Cole interrupted, more firmly than he'd intended. "Anyone would have done the same." Ivy's smile was sad. "You'd be surprised." They ate in comfortable silence after that, the only sounds the wind howling outside and the soft clink of spoons against bowls. Cole found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did around strangers, though he couldn't have said why. Maybe it was because Ivy didn't seem to expect anything from him beyond basic human decency, or maybe it was the way she seemed as comfortable, with quiet as he was. When she finished eating, Cole showed her to the guest room, a simple but comfortable space with its own bathroom and a view of the front pasture that would be spectacular once the storm cleared. He provided her with some clean towels and one of his old flannel shirts to sleep in, then left her alone to settle in. Back in his own room, Cole found himself staring out at the storm and thinking about gray eyes and the way someone could look, both fragile and strong at the same time. Tomorrow, he told himself, he'd help her make some calls, maybe drive her to town when the roads cleared. Tonight was just about basic human kindness. Nothing more. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, Cole couldn't shake the feeling that finding Ivy Brenner in his barn was going to change more than just his evening plans. Cole woke before dawn, as he had every day for the past 15 years. The storm was still raging outside, though it seemed to have lost some of its earlier fury. He dressed quietly and made his way to the kitchen, where the smell of coffee would normally greet him. Instead, he found Ivy already there, standing at the window with a mug in her hands, wearing his flannel shirt over what looked like yesterday's clothes. "Morning," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, offering him a tentative smile. "I hope you don't mind." "I couldn't sleep. And I made coffee." "Course not." Cole poured himself a mug and joined her at the window. The snow was still falling, but lighter now, and he could make out the shapes of the outbuildings through the gray morning light. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Much better. Thanks to you." She paused, studying his profile. "I keep thinking I should pinch myself. Yesterday feels like a nightmare I'm still trying to wake up from." Before Cole could respond, the weather radio on his kitchen counter crackled to life. The metallic voice of the National Weather Service filled the room, delivering news that made Cole's stomach drop. Blizzard warning extended through Thursday evening. Additional 6 to 8 inches expected. Travel strongly discouraged. Emergency. Crews are suspended until conditions improve. Cole reached over and turned down the volume, but the damage was done. It was Monday morning. Thursday evening meant 3 more days, minimum, before the roads would be passable. "I'm so sorry," Ivy said quietly. "I know this isn't what you planned." "Plans change," Cole replied, though his mind was already racing through the implications. 3 days, maybe 4. He had enough supplies. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that he hadn't had anyone stay in his house longer than a single night since he'd bought the place. The problem was the way Ivy looked in his kitchen, like she belonged there, which was ridiculous because she didn't belong here any more than a hothouse orchid belonged in a cattle pasture. "I could try to make it to town," Ivy offered, though. Her voice lacked conviction. "In this weather? Absolutely not." Cole's response was sharper than he'd intended, and he saw Ivy flinch slightly. He softened his tone. "The roads are impassable. Even my truck wouldn't make it, and I've got chains and 4-wheel drive." Ivy nodded, wrapping her hands more tightly around her coffee mug. "Then I guess we're stuck with each other." "Guess so." Cole studied her face, noting the circles under her eyes and the way she held herself careful, contained, like someone who'd learned not to take up too much space. You said you were a violinist. Professional? Was, she corrected. I played with the Austin Symphony for 3 years, did some solo work, toured with various ensembles. Classical music doesn't pay much unless you're one of the very few who make it to the top tier. What happened? Ivy was quiet for so long Cole thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, I had what they call a crisis of confidence. Started making mistakes in performances. Lost my nerve during solos. When you're playing classical music professionally, there's no room for that kind of uncertainty. Cole heard what she wasn't saying. Someone important heard one of those performances. The music director of the Dallas Symphony. I was auditioning for first chair violin. Ivy's smile was rueful. I made it through 2 movements of the Brahms concerto before my hand started shaking so badly I couldn't continue. He thanked me very politely and said they'd be in touch. They never called. Oh, they called to let me know they decided to go with someone else. Someone more reliable. Cole felt an unexpected surge of anger on her behalf. Their loss. You haven't heard me play, Ivy pointed out. Don't need to. Anyone who travels the country playing music, who's good enough to audition for a major symphony, that takes talent and dedication. One bad day doesn't erase that. Ivy looked at him with surprise, as if kindness was the last thing she'd expected. Thank you for saying that. Cole nodded and turned his attention back to the window. He was getting too involved already, asking too many questions, caring too much about her answers. But something about Ivy's quiet resilience drew him in despite his better judgment. I should probably check on the horses, he said finally. Storm like this, they get restless. Could I come with you? The question surprised them both. Ivy seemed as startled by her own words as Cole was to hear them. I mean, if I'm going to be here for a few days, maybe I could help somehow. I'm not much use around a ranch, but I can learn. Cole's instinct was to say no. His morning routine was sacred, a carefully constructed series of tasks that helped him start each day with purpose and clarity. He didn't need help, didn't want company, and certainly didn't need the distraction of watching Ivy navigate his world. But when he opened his mouth to decline politely, what came out was, bundle up, it's cold out there. 20 minutes later, they were trudging through knee-deep snow toward the main barn, Ivy wearing one of Cole's spare winter coats that swallowed her small frame. She stayed close to him, following in his footsteps, and didn't complain about the cold or the difficult walking. The barn was warm and filled with the familiar sounds of horses stirring in their stalls. Cole had 12 horses currently, quarter horses for ranch work, 2 thoroughbreds he bred occasionally, and 2 others he preferred not to think about too much. They're beautiful, Ivy breathed, approaching the first stall where Thunder stood munching hay. That's Thunder. He's the one who found you last night. Cole opened the stall and ran his hands along the stallion's neck, checking for any signs of stress from the previous evening's ride. Ivy extended her hand carefully, letting Thunder sniff her fingers before stroking his nose. Thank you, she whispered to the horse, and Cole felt something shift in his chest at the sight. They moved through the barn methodically, Cole checking each animal while Ivy watched and occasionally offered a gentle touch or soft word. She had good instincts with the horses, he noticed. No sudden movements, no fear, just a quiet respect that the animals seemed to appreciate. What about those 2? Ivy asked when they reached the last 2 stalls. Cole hesitated. They single quotes projects. Projects? Against his better judgment, Cole opened the first stall to reveal a paint mare with obvious scarring along her right flank. The horse shied away from him, pressing herself against the far wall. Her name's Daisy. Found her at an auction 2 years ago. She'd been mistreated, abandoned. Most people would have put her down. Cole kept his voice low and calm. She's getting better, but it takes time. Ivy approached the stall slowly, her expression soft with understanding. Poor girl. What happened to her? Best we can figure. Someone used her for target practice. She's got buckshot scars all along her right side. Cole's jaw tightened as it always did when he thought about what humans were capable of doing to defenseless animals. And the other one? Cole moved to the final stall, where a young gelding stood with his head hanging low. This is Jasper. 3 years old, should be in his prime. His previous owner tried to break him using methods that went out of fashion 50 years ago. You're rehabilitating them, Ivy said softly. It wasn't a question. I'm giving them a place to heal, Cole corrected. Whether they ever trust humans again is up to them. Ivy studied his profile as he checked Jasper's feed and water. How many horses have you saved? I don't save anything. I just provide a safe place for animals that need one. How many, Cole? He was quiet for a moment, then said reluctantly, maybe 24 over the years. Word gets around. People know they can bring me the ones nobody else wants. What happens? To them? Do you find them new homes? Some, the ones that recover enough to trust again. Others stay here permanently. Cole moved away from Jasper's stall, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. It's not a big deal. But Ivy was looking at him like it was a very big deal indeed, like she was seeing something in him that he'd worked hard to keep hidden. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone colder, I suppose. More distant. Cole almost laughed at that. If only she knew how distant he really was, how much effort it took for him to let her into even this small part of his world. I'm plenty distant. Are you? Ivy moved closer to Daisy's stall, extending her hand slowly. The Mare watched her, warily but didn't shy away. Then why do I feel like I'm seeing the real you right now, for the first time? The question hit Cole like a physical blow. He turned away, busying himself with checking the barn's heating system. We should head back. You're probably getting cold. Cole. Something in her voice made him stop and turn around. Ivy was standing in a shaft of weak morning light filtering through the barn's windows, and for a moment she looked ethereal, like something that might disappear if he looked away. Thank you, she said simply, for showing me this, for trusting me with it. Cole wanted to tell her that trust had nothing to do with it, that he'd simply run out of polite ways to avoid her questions. But the words wouldn't come, because somewhere between the coffee and the barn, between her gentle handling of his horses and the way she looked at his rescue work like it mattered, he'd done something he hadn't intended to do. He'd started to care about what she thought of him got, and that was dangerous territory for a man who'd built his entire adult life around not caring what anyone thought about anything. The second day brought clearer skies but no respite from the cold. Cole woke to find Ivy already in the kitchen again, this time attempting to cook breakfast. The smell of burning bacon filled the air, and smoke was rising from the skillet. Here, let me. Cole reached around her to turn off the burner, his chest brushing against her back. The contact lasted only a second, but it was enough to make them both freeze. I'm not much of a cook, Ivy admitted, stepping away quickly. I thought I could at least try to earn my keep. You don't need to earn anything. Cole rescued the bacon, most of which was salvageable. But if you want to help, I could use an extra pair of hands with the morning chores. An hour later, they were back in the barn, and Cole was showing Ivy how to properly measure horse feed. She was a quick learner. He had to admit, though her city background showed in small ways, the careful way she walked around the animals, her surprise at how much horses actually ate, her complete unfamiliarity with ranch equipment. Here, Cole said, pulling a worn pair of leatherwork gloves from his jacket pocket. These were my father's. They'll be too big, but they'll protect your hands. Ivy took the gloves reverently, running her fingers over the supple leather. Are you sure? They must mean something to you. He'd want them to be useful, Cole replied, though the words came out rougher than he'd intended. He rarely talked about his father, rarely even thought about him if he could help it. Ivy pulled on the gloves, which indeed swallowed her small hands. Tell me about him. Not much to tell. Cole began distributing hay to the stalls, his movements automatic after years of practice. He was a good man, worked hard, cared about his animals and his land. How did he die? Cole's hands stilled on the hay bale. Most people didn't ask direct questions like that, preferring to dance around the subject of his loss. Ivy's straightforwardness was both refreshing and unsettling. "Fire," he said finally. 15 years ago. He and my mother both. I'm sorry." Ivy's voice was soft, but not pitying, and Cole was grateful for that. "Were you close?" Cole considered the question as he continued his work. "I thought I was. Turns out I didn't know him as well as I believed." "What do you mean?" "Nothing important." Cole moved to Thunder's stall, effectively ending the conversation. But he could feel Ivy watching him, and he sensed she wasn't satisfied. With his non-answer, they worked in companionable silence after that, Ivy following his lead and absorbing his instructions with surprising aptitude. When they reached Daisy's stall, Ivy paused. "Could I try feeding her?" Cole hesitated. Daisy was unpredictable on her best days, and strangers usually sent her into a panic. But something about Ivy's gentle presence seemed to calm the damaged. "Mare, move slowly," he instructed. "Let her see everything you're doing." Ivy approached the stall with infinite patience, talking softly to Daisy as she prepared the feed. The Mare watched her warily, but didn't retreat. When Ivy offered the feed bucket, Daisy actually took a step forward. "She likes you," Cole observed, surprised. "We understand each other," Ivy replied quietly. "Sometimes when you've been hurt badly enough, it takes a while to believe that someone might actually want to help." Cole felt those words like a physical blow. He studied Ivy's profile as she continued to coax Daisy closer, noting the careful way she moved, the patience in every gesture. How many times had someone hurt her before she'd learned to approach the world with such wariness? "There you go, sweet girl," Ivy murmured as Daisy finally came close enough to eat from the bucket. "See? Nothing to be afraid of." Cole found himself watching Ivy instead of the horse, fascinated by the transformation in her demeanor. In the house, she'd been polite but reserved. Out here, with the animals, she seemed to relax into herself. "You're a natural with them," he said. Ivy glanced at him with surprise. "Really? I've never been around horses before." "Doesn't matter. Some people have the instinct, others don't. You can't teach what you're doing right now." A flush of pleasure colored Ivy's cheeks, and Cole felt an unexpected warmth at being the cause of it. When was the last time he'd given someone a genuine compliment? When was the last time someone had looked at him like his opinion mattered? "Tell me about the music," he said as they moved to the next stall. "When did you start playing?" "I was 5. Ivy's smile turned wistful. "My grandmother had an old violin that belonged to her grandmother. When she heard me humming along to classical music on the radio, she decided I should learn." "Your grandmother taught you?" "For the first few years. Then she passed away, and my parents," Ivy paused, her expression tightening. "They saw potential for scholarships, competitions, maybe even a career if I was good enough. So they found me better teachers, enrolled me in music programs, pushed me to practice longer and harder." Cole heard the careful neutrality in her voice, and recognized it for what it was, the tone someone used when they were trying not to reveal how much something had hurt them. "Sounds like a lot of pressure for a kid." "It was worth it, though. Music was everything to me. The only thing that made sense in a world that often didn't." Ivy's voice softened. "When I played, especially when I played well, it felt like I was touching something bigger than myself. Like I was part of something beautiful and eternal." "What happened to that feeling?" Ivy was quiet for so long Cole thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "Fear, I think. Somewhere along the way, I stopped playing for the joy of it, and started playing to avoid disappointing people. And when you're performing out of fear instead of love, the music knows. The audience knows." "Is that what happened at the audition?" "Partly." Ivy finished with the feed bucket and hung it on its hook with practiced efficiency. "But there were other things, too. Personal things that I let affect my confidence." Cole waited, sensing there was more she wanted to say. "I was engaged," Ivy continued finally, "to another musician, a pianist. We met in graduate school, and everyone said we were perfect for each other. Both classical musicians, both ambitious, both from families that valued achievement above everything else." "What happened?" "He got an offer to join a prestigious ensemble in Europe. I got the audition with Dallas. We were supposed to be making decisions about our future together, But it turned out he'd already made his decision. He took the position in Europe and suggested we take a break to figure things out. Cole felt his jaw tighten. He left you 2 weeks before my audition. Apparently, he'd been having doubts about our relationship for months, but didn't want to distract me before such an important performance. Ivy's laugh was bitter. Instead, he waited until I was at my most vulnerable, and then pulled the rug out from under me. That's when you lost your confidence. That's when I lost everything. My relationship, my audition, my position with the Austin Symphony, when word got around about what had happened in Dallas. Nobody wants to hire a violinist who can't handle pressure. Cole stopped what he was doing and turned to face her fully. So you were traveling with this tour group? Small venues, mostly. Christmas concerts for retirement communities, community centers, that sort of thing. It wasn't the career I dreamed of, but it was music, and it was keeping me fed. Ivy's smile was rueful, barely. And they just left you at that truck stop. The other musicians complained that I was bringing down the group's morale, sighed I was too negative, too withdrawn. The tour manager decided it would be easier to continue without me. Cole felt a surge of anger on her behalf that was so intense it surprised him. What kind of people abandon someone at a truck stop in the middle of a blizzard? People who can't afford to let sentiment interfere with business. Ivy replied matter-of-factly. I can't really blame them. I haven't exactly been good company lately. That doesn't excuse Cole. Ivy's hand touched his arm lightly, stopping his words. It's okay. I'm okay. If they hadn't left me, I never would have met you. The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. Cole looked down at Ivy's hand on his arm, small and pale against his work shirt, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. We should check on Jasper, he said finally, his voice rougher than usual. But as they moved to the young gelding's stall, Cole found himself thinking about second chances and the strange ways that life sometimes brought exactly the right person into your world at exactly the moment you needed them most, even if you didn't know you needed them at all. That evening, while Cole worked in his office handling the business side of the ranch, Ivy found herself drawn to explore the house more thoroughly. She'd been careful to stay in the common areas and her guest room, not wanting to overstep boundaries, but curiosity finally got the better of her. The house was beautiful in an understated way, clean lines, quality materials, but with a Spartan quality that spoke of someone who valued function over decoration. There were few personal touches, as if Cole lived here but didn't quite inhabit the space. She was admiring a landscape painting in the hallway when she noticed a partially open door that revealed what looked like a sitting room. Through the gap, she could see built-in bookshelves and the edge of a piano bench. Ivy pushed the door open wider and gasped. The room was clearly a music room, though it had the feel of a space that hadn't been used in years. A baby grand piano dominated one corner, its ebony surface covered with a thin layer of dust. Sheet music was stacked neatly on the bench, and the bookshelves held an impressive collection of classical compositions. But it was the small object on the piano that drew her attention, a delicate music box with intricate carving around its edges. Ivy approached it slowly, as if it might be a mirage that would disappear if she moved too quickly. That was my mother's. Ivy spun around to find Cole standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to snoop. The door was open and I saw the piano. It's fine. Cole entered the room, though his posture remained tense. I should have warned you about this room. Your mother was a musician? Cole nodded, moving too. Stand beside the piano. She played beautifully. Not professionally, but well enough that people used to ask her to perform at church functions and community events. Ivy looked at the sheet music on the bench. Chopin, Debussy, pieces that required considerable skill. These are advanced compositions. She was largely self-taught, started playing as a child, and never stopped. Cole's voice held a warmth Ivy hadn't heard before. She said music was the language her soul spoke when words weren't enough. That's beautiful. Ivy touched the music box gently. Does it still work? Cole reached over and wound the small key, then lifted the lid. A delicate melody filled the room, Chopin's Minute Waltz, played by tiny mechanical figures that danced around the box's interior. She used to play this piece, Cole said quietly. Said it reminded her that even the most complex, beautiful things could be broken down into simple, perfect moments. Ivy listened to the music box's tinkling melody, watching the figures spin. In their eternal dance, she sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Cole closed the music box gently. She would have liked you. The words seemed to surprise him as much as they did Ivy. They looked at each other across the dusty piano, and Ivy felt something electric pass between them, a recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of something neither was quite ready to name. Would you play something? Cole asked suddenly. I don't have my violin. I meant the piano. I saw you looking at the sheet music. Ivy hesitated. I haven't played piano in years. I focused on violin once I got serious about music. Doesn't matter. I'd like to hear music in this room again. There was something vulnerable in the request, something that made Ivy unable to refuse. She sat down at the bench, her fingers finding the keys tentatively. The piano was perfectly tuned. She realized someone had been maintaining it even if no one was playing it. She started with something simple, a piece by Satie that required more feeling than technical skill. Her fingers were rusty on the keys, but muscle memory is a powerful thing, and soon the gentle melody was flowing through. The room like water finding its course. Cole stood perfectly still as she played, his eyes closed. When the piece ended, he opened them and looked at her with an expression that made her breath catch. That was beautiful, he said quietly. Satie, Gymnopédie no one. It's one of my favorites. Play something else. Ivy found herself reaching for one of the pieces from the music bench, a Chopin nocturne that she'd learned years ago for a college recital. This one was more challenging, requiring both technical skill and emotional interpretation. But as she played, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Pure joy in making music. The notes filled the room like sunlight, chasing away shadows that had lingered there too long. Ivy lost herself in the music, her earlier fears and failures forgotten in the simple pleasure of creating something beautiful. When she finished, the silence that followed was different from the emptiness that had filled the room before it, was the silence of completion, of something restored. Thank you, Cole said, and his voice was rough with emotion. Thank you for letting me play. I'd forgotten how much I missed it. Cole moved closer to the piano, running his fingers along its edge. She died at this piano. The words hung in the air like a confession. Ivy felt her heart clench at the pain in Cole's voice. She and my father were both in the house when the fire started. By the time I got here, the flames had already spread to most of the first floor. I could hear her playing. She was in this room, and she was playing Mozart, Ein klein Nachtmusik. Ivy's hands went still on the keys. Cole, I couldn't get to them in time. His voice was barely above a whisper. The roof collapsed before the fire department arrived, but she kept playing until the very end. Even when she must have known, he stopped, unable to finish. I'm so sorry, Ivy whispered. I rebuilt the house exactly as it was before, every detail. But I couldn't bring myself to use this room, couldn't bear to hear music here again. Until tonight, Cole nodded. Until tonight. They stood there in the soft glow of the piano lamp, two people who had lost so much finding something unexpected in each other's company. Ivy understood now why Cole lived alone, why he kept people at a distance. The weight of such a loss, the guilt of surviving when the people you loved most didn't. It would be enough to break anyone. The scholarship fund you mentioned, she said carefully. It's in their memory, isn't it? Cole's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Every year I fund 3 full scholarships to state universities. Kids from rural families who show academic promise but can't afford college. That's wonderful. It's not enough. The words came out harsh, filled with self-recrimination. It's never enough. Says who? Says me. Says logic. Says Cole stopped, frustrated. Says the man who's been carrying guilt that isn't his to carry. Ivy finished gently. Cole, you can't save everyone. You couldn't save your parents, but that doesn't make their deaths your fault. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Cole was quiet for a long moment, and said, the fire started because of faulty wiring. In the barn. Wiring I'd been meaning to replace for months, but kept putting off because I was too busy expanding the herd, buying more land, making more money. If I'd just taken the time to fix something that needed fixing, they'd still be alive, Ivy finished. Yes, and you've been punishing yourself ever since. Cole didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Can I tell you something? Ivy stood up from the piano bench and moved closer to him. When my fiancé left me, I blamed myself completely. I convinced myself that if I'd been a better partner, more supportive of his career, less focused on my own ambitions, he would have stayed. I replayed every conversation we'd had in those final months, looking for the moment where I went wrong. That's different, is it? We both lost people we loved. We both found ways to make it our fault. But the truth is, Cole, sometimes terrible things happen for reasons that have nothing to do with us. Sometimes the only choice we have is how we move forward. Cole looked at her with eyes that held years of pain. How do you move forward when moving forward feels like betraying their memory? By living a life they would have been proud of. By opening your heart to the possibility that there might still be beautiful things ahead. Ivy reached out and touched his hand, by letting music fill this room again. For a moment, they stood there with her hand covering his, both of them, thinking about loss and healing and the strange alchemy that sometimes allowed two broken people to make each other whole. Play something else, Cole said finally. Ivy returned to the piano and began a piece she'd never played before, one of the compositions from the stack on the bench. It was complex and challenging, requiring her to sight read while she played, but somehow it felt right. As the music flowed through the room, she could almost feel Cole's mother's presence, as if the woman who had loved this piano was pleased to hear it sing again. When she finished, Cole was smiling, the first real smile Ivy had seen from him. She would have loved that, he said. I hope so. I know so. Cole moved to the music box and wound it again, letting its simple melody join the echoes of the piano. Thank you, Ivy, for bringing music back to this room. For bringing, he paused, searching for the right words. What? Light, he said simply. For bringing light back into a place that's been dark for too long. The third morning brought sunshine and the sound of snow melting from the eaves. Cole was in his office early, reviewing quarterly reports and preparing for a conference call with his accountant, when his fax machine began churning out pages. The cover sheet made his blood run cold. Martin Graves Development Group, legal. Notice. By the time Ivy appeared in the kitchen with her morning coffee, Cole was seated at the breakfast table surrounded by legal documents, his jaw tight with anger. What's wrong? She asked immediately, noting his expression. Cole held up the stack of papers. Someone's trying to steal water rights from half the ranchers in this county. Ivy sat down across from him, studying his face. Can they do that? There. Sure as hell going to try. Cole's voice was grim as he flipped through the documents. Martin Graves. He's been circling this area like a vulture for the past 2 years, buying up struggling ranches and converting them to housing developments. That doesn't sound necessarily bad. People need homes. These aren't homes for locals. These are luxury. Subdivisions for city folks who want to play cowboy on the weekends. Cole's frustration was evident in every line of his body. Graves buys ranches during drought years when families are desperate to sell. Then he lobbies to change water rights. Laws so he can access underground aquifers that have sustained this area for generations. Ivy read over his shoulder, trying to make sense of the legal language. What does this notice actually say? It says that Graves is petitioning the county to reclassify water usage rights for what he calls agricultural optimization. What it really means is that he wants to cap the amount of water small ranchers can use while allowing unlimited access for his developments. Can he do that legally? Unfortunately, yes. If he can prove that his land use would be more economically beneficial to the county than traditional ranching. Cole's jaw tightened further, which he can, because luxury homes generate more tax revenue than cattle operations. Ivy studied the documents more carefully. How many ranchers would this affect? Dozens. Families who've been working this land for 3 or 4 generations, suddenly finding themselves unable to water their stock or irrigate their pastures. Cole stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The Hendersons have been barely making ends. Meet since the drought 2 years ago. Mrs. Peterson is already talking about selling, because she can't manage the ranch alone since her husband died. If Graves gets these water rights changed, it'll force them all out. There has to be something that can be done. Like what? Fight a team of corporate lawyers with ranch sale proceeds? Cole's voice was bitter. These are good people, Ivy, but they don't have the resources to take on someone like Graves. What about you? You seem to be doing well financially. Cole's expression darkened. I can't fight everyone's battles for them. Can't or won't. The question hung in the air between them, sharper than Ivy had intended. Cole turned from the window to look at her, and she saw something flicker across. His face guilt, maybe, or recognition of a truth he didn't want to acknowledge. You don't understand the situation, he said finally. Then explain it to me. Cole was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something internal. Then he said, I bought my water rights legally, same as anyone else. But I bought them during the drought, when desperate people were selling everything they could to stay afloat. You bought from people like the Hendersons? Not the Hendersons specifically, but similar situations. Families who needed cash immediately and couldn't afford to wait for land values to recover. Cole's voice was tight with self-recrimination. I told myself I was helping them by offering fair market value when no one else was buying. But the truth is, I profited from their desperation. Ivy began to understand the complexity of Cole's situation. And now you feel guilty about having water rights that others need. I feel guilty about a lot of things. Cole returned to the table, sinking into his chair. Including the fact that I could probably help these families fight Graves, but doing so would mean getting involved in community politics and making myself a target, so you stay isolated instead. I stay out of fights that aren't mine to fight. Ivy leaned back in her chair, studying Cole's face. These people are your neighbors. How is their fight not your fight? Because once you start getting involved in other people's problems, where does it end? I helped the Hendersons keep their ranch. Then what? Do I become the county's unofficial banker? Do I start making decisions about who deserves help and who doesn't? Or maybe you just help because it's the right thing to do. Cole laughed, but there was no humor in it. Right and wrong aren't as clear-cut as you seem to think they are. Aren't they? Ivy pulled the legal documents toward her, scanning them again. This Graves person is trying to destroy people's livelihoods for profit. How is that not clearly wrong? Because this is America, and people have the right to buy and sell property as they see fit. Graves isn't breaking any laws. Legal and moral aren't always the same thing. Cole was quiet for a moment, then said, You sound like my mother. What would she have done? She would have organized a potluck dinner and invited every affected family to discuss the situation. Then she would have convinced my father to take the lead in fighting Graves, and somehow she would have made him believe it was his own idea. Smart woman. She was. Cole's expression softened slightly. She used to say that isolation was just fear wearing a disguise. What do you think she'd say about this situation? Before Cole could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. It's Sam Henderson. Cole answered the call, putting it on speaker. Morning, Sam. Cole, thank God you're there. Sam Henderson's voice was strained with worry. Did you get papers from that Graves fellow? Just this morning. You? Yesterday. Martha's been crying since she read them. We can't afford to fight this, Cole. We just can't. If we lose our water rights, we'll have to sell the ranch. Cole's jaw tightened. How bad is your situation, Sam? Bad? The drought wiped out most of our savings, and we're still behind on equipment. Loans. Even if we wanted to fight Graves, we couldn't hire a lawyer worth a damn. Ivy watched Cole's face as he listened to his neighbor's desperation. She could see the internal struggle playing out in his expression, the desire to help Waring, with his need to stay uninvolved. What are the other families saying? Cole asked. Most are talking about selling while they still can. The Petersons already called a realtor. The Williams family is trying to figure out if they can subdivide their land and sell off parcels to. Stay afloat. Sam, let me think about this. I'll call you back. Cole, I know you don't like getting involved in community business, but if there's anything you can do, these families need help. After Cole hung up, silence filled the kitchen. Ivy could practically feel the weight of his internal conflict. 37 years, Cole said finally. What? Sam and Martha Henderson have been ranching for 37 years. They met at a county fair when they were both 18, got married 6 months later, and bought their ranch with money Sam earned working oil rigs in the Gulf. They've survived droughts, market crashes, disease outbreaks, and Martha's breast cancer. Now they're going to lose everything because some corporate developer wants to build luxury homes where their cattle graze. Ivy reached across the table and covered Cole's hand with hers. So help them. It's not that simple. Why not? Cole pulled his hand away, standing to pace again. Because once I get involved, I become responsible. If I fight Graves and lose, those families lose their last chance to sell at a decent price. If I fight Graves and win, I become the person. Everyone turns to when they need someone to solve their problems. And that scares you. That terrifies me. Cole's ignition was quiet but fierce. I've spent 15 years building a life where I don't have to worry about letting people down, where I don't have to carry the weight of other people's expectations or needs. Cole, you want to know the truth about why I helped those rescue horses? Because animals don't expect you to save them. They don't blame you when you can't fix everything that's wrong with their world. They just appreciate whatever help you can give, and they don't ask for more than you're willing to offer. Ivy felt her heart break a little at the pain in his voice. People aren't that different from animals, you know. Most of them just want to know that someone cares enough to try, and what happens when trying isn't enough. Then at least you know you did what you could. Cole stopped pacing and looked at her directly. Is that what you told yourself when your music career fell apart? That at least you tried? The words hit Ivy like a physical blow. She felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of hurt and anger. That's not fair, isn't it? You gave up, Ivy. When things got difficult, when people disappointed you, you gave up on music and ended up stranded at a truck stop in the middle of nowhere. I didn't give up. You were what? Protecting yourself? Avoiding the possibility of future disappointment? Cole's voice was harsh now, but Ivy could hear the pain underneath. How is that different from what I'm doing? The truth of his words stung because there was validity in them. Ivy had been protecting herself, had been avoiding situations where she might fail again. But there was a crucial difference that Cole couldn't see. You're right, she said quietly. I did give up, but that's exactly why I know what it costs. That's why I know you'll regret it if you don't at least try to help. These people? Cole stared at her for a long moment, then sank back into his chair. What if I try and fail? What if I make things worse? What if you don't try and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have happened if you had? They sat in silence, both thinking about choices and consequences, about the weight of action versus the burden of inaction. Outside, the snow continued to melt, creating small rivers that would eventually find their way to larger streams, just as individual decisions would eventually flow into the larger current of a life lived with purpose or regret. The tension between them carried through the rest of the morning. Cole threw himself into ranch work with unusual intensity, checking fences that didn't need checking and reorganizing equipment that was already perfectly organized. Ivy helped where she could, but the easy camaraderie they'd developed over the past few days had shifted into something more complicated. By afternoon, Ivy's phone had been buzzing insistently for hours. She'd been ignoring it, but finally, while Cole was in the barn, she answered. Ivy, thank God. The voice belonged to Patricia Vance, her former manager. I've been trying to reach you for days. Where are you? I'm safe, Ivy replied carefully. The tour bus left me at a truck stop during the blizzard. Left you? What do you mean left you? I mean they drove away without me, Patricia. I'm stranded at a ranch until the road's clear. There was a pause, then Patricia's voice turned businesslike. Well, that's unfortunate, but I have good news. I've been fielding calls about you since word got out about your situation. What kind of calls? Sympathy bookings, mostly. 3 different venues want to hire you for solo performances. Apparently, your story-talented musician abandoned by her tour group has generated some media interest. Ivy felt her stomach clench. Media interest? Nothing major, just some human interest pieces in music publications. But it's good exposure, Ivy. People are talking about you again. People are talking about me as a cautionary tale. People are talking about you as a survivor. There's a difference. Patricia's voice grew more animated. I've got a venue in Austin that wants to book you for New Year's Eve. Solo violin performance. Good money, and it would put you back on the classical music map. Ivy sank into a kitchen chair, feeling overwhelmed. I don't know if I'm ready or not. This is your chance to rebuild your career. You can't stay hidden forever, Ivy. I'm not hiding. Aren't you? When was the last time you performed? When was the last time you even practiced? The question stung because Patricia was right. Ivy had been hiding, avoiding the music world that had once defined her. But in the past few days, playing Cole's mother's piano, she'd remembered why. She'd fallen in love with music in the first place. I need time to think about it, Ivy said finally. Don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often. After Patricia hung up, Ivy sat staring at her phone, feeling the weight of a decision she wasn't ready to make. In the distance, she could hear Cole working in the barn, and part of her wanted to run to him, to seek comfort in his steady presence. But their argument that morning had shown her something she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. She was falling in love with a man who was just as scared of taking risks as she was. When Cole came in for dinner, he found Ivy standing at the stove, stirring a pot of soup with mechanical precision. Her phone lay on the counter beside her, and he could tell from her posture that something had changed. Everything okay? He asked carefully. My former manager called. Apparently, my situation has generated some media attention. Cole felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of attention? A kind that wants to book me for performances. Ivy turned to face him, and he could see the conflict in her eyes. There's a venue in Austin that wants me for New Year's Eve, a solo performance. That's good news, Cole said, though the words felt like glass in his throat. Is it? They looked at each other across the kitchen, both understanding that this conversation was about more than just a job offer. It's what you wanted, isn't it? Cole asked. To get your career back on track? I thought it was. Ivy's voice was quiet, but now I'm not sure what I want. Cole moved closer, drawn by the uncertainty in her voice. What's making you doubt it? You, Ivy said simply. This place. The way I feel when I'm here. The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they were ready to cross. Ivy, I know what you're going to say, she interrupted. That this is temporary, that I have a life to get back to. That what's happening between us is just ... What? Proximity? Gratitude? Is it? Cole asked, his voice rougher than usual. You? Tell me. Ivy stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of blue in her gray eyes. Because from where I'm standing, it feels like something a lot more significant than that. Cole wanted to pull her into his arms, wanted to tell her that she was right, that what he felt for her was more real than anything he'd experienced in years. But the fear was stronger than the want, and fear had kept him safe for a very long time. You should take the job, he said instead. Ivy stepped back as if he'd slapped her. That's it? That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say? Ivy? That you should give up your career to stay here with me? That you should throw away your chance to rebuild your life for someone you've known for 3 days? I want you to be honest about what you're feeling. What I'm feeling doesn't matter. It matters to me. Cole turned away, unable to look at the hurt in her eyes. You're a classical musician, Ivy. You belong in concert halls and recording studios, not on a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere. Don't I get to decide where I belong? Not when you're running away from something. Cole's words were harsh, but they came from a place of pain rather than anger. You said yourself that you've been hiding. Taking this job offer is how you stop hiding. And what about you? When do you stop hiding? I'm not hiding. Aren't you? You live alone on a ranch where your closest neighbors are miles away. You help people anonymously so they can't thank you or get too close. You've built your entire life around avoiding the possibility of meaningful connection with another human being. Cole's jaw tightened. That's not. Your parents died 15 years ago, Cole. How much longer are you going to punish yourself? For surviving? This isn't about my parents, isn't it? Isn't everything about your parents? The way you live, the way you avoid getting close to people, the way you're pushing me away right now? Cole spun to face her, his control finally snapping. Yes, it's about my parents. It's about the fact that everyone I've ever cared about has left me one way or another. It's about the fact that caring about people means watching them get hurt, or disappear or die. And I can't. He stopped, breathing hard. You can't what? I can't go through that again, Cole finished quietly. I can't care about someone and then lose them. Ivy felt her heart break at the pain in his voice. So you'd rather lose me now, while it's your choice? I'd rather you leave before. Cole stopped again, unable to finish the thought. Before what? Before you care too much? Before I become important enough that losing me would actually hurt? Cole didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. I've got news for you, Cole, Ivy said softly. It's too late for that. You already care, and so do I. She moved past him toward the hallway, pausing at the doorway. For what it's worth, she said without turning around, I wasn't planning to. Take the job. I was going to tell Patricia that I needed more time, that I'd found something here worth staying for. But you're right, I can't throw away my chance to rebuild my life for someone who's too scared to admit he wants me to stay. After she left, Cole stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of soup and the weight of words that couldn't be taken back. Outside, the snow continued to melt, but inside the house, the temperature seemed to have dropped 20 degrees. Thought about calling after her, about telling her the truth, that he'd fallen for her harder and faster than he'd thought possible, that the idea of her leaving made him feel like he was suffocating. But fear was a powerful thing, and it had protected him for so long that he didn't know how to function without it. So instead, he stood there listening to her footsteps fade down the hallway, knowing that he was about to lose the best thing that had happened to him in 15 years, and that it was entirely his own fault. The roads finally cleared on Thursday morning, just as the weather service had predicted. Cole was in his office before dawn, making arrangements for someone to drive Ivy to town so she could catch a bus to Austin. He told himself he was being practical, helpful, that getting her back to her life was the right thing to do for both of them. He didn't expect to find her in his office when he returned from his morning chores, standing at his filing cabinet, with a manila folder in her hands and an expression of shocked recognition on her face. Ivy? What are you doing in here? She held up the folder, her hands trembling slightly. I was looking for a phone book so I could call a cab. I knocked over some files, and when I was picking them up, I found this. Cole's blood ran cold when he saw what she was holding, a property deed with Martin Graves' name prominently displayed across the top. You can explain this, right? Ivy's voice was carefully controlled, but Cole could hear the hurt underneath. Please tell me there's a reasonable explanation for why you have a deed to the property that Graves wants for his development. Cole closed his eyes, feeling the weight of a secret he'd hoped never to reveal. Ivy, because what it looks like, she continued, her voice growing stronger with anger, is that you've been lying to me? What it looks like is that you're in business with a man who's trying to destroy your neighbors' lives. I'm not in business with Graves. Then why do you have his property deed? Cole moved to his desk, sinking into his chair. The time for secrets was over, apparently, whether he was ready or not. Because I own that property, he said quietly. Ivy stared at him. What? The land that Graves wants for his development. I own it. I've owned it for 2 years. That's impossible. The legal documents list Martin Graves' development group as the petitioning party because they have a contract to purchase the land if certain conditions are met. Cole's voice was flat, drained of emotion. But the actual deed is in my name. Ivy sank into the chair across from his desk, the folder falling from her nerveless fingers. I don't understand. 2 years ago, when the drought was at its worst, the Williamson Ranch was going into foreclosure. They'd been neighbors of my parents, good people who'd just run out of options. The bank was going to auction the property to the highest bidder. And you bought it. I bought it to keep it from being developed. I paid well above market value, enough to clear their debts and give them something to start over with. Cole's jaw tightened. But I bought it under a shell company name so they wouldn't. No, it was me. Why? Because if people knew I was buying up distressed properties, they'd either resent me for profiting from their misfortune, or they'd expect me to solve everyone's financial problems. Ivy shook her head, still trying to process the information. But if you own the land, why is Graves trying to develop it? Because 6 months ago, I made a mistake. Cole's voice was bitter with self-recrimination. Graves approached me with an offer. Not to buy the land outright, but to enter into a development partnership. He said he could triple the property's value within 5 years. And you agreed? I signed a preliminary agreement giving him exclusive development rights, if he could secure the necessary water permits and zoning changes. Cole looked directly at Ivy, needing her to understand. It was supposed to be a sure thing. Graves told me the permits were just a formality, that the county was eager to increase its tax base. But they weren't a formality. No. Turns out the county commissioners are more concerned about preserving the area's agricultural character than Graves led me to believe. So now he's trying to force the issue by challenging the existing water rights structure. Ivy felt a surge of anger that made her hands shake. Do you understand what you've done? You've given Graves leverage to destroy every small ranch in this county. I know that. And you've been sitting here for 3 days, listening to me talk about how terrible Graves is, watching you agonize over whether to help your neighbors, and you never once mentioned that you hold the key to stopping him? Cole flinched at the accusation in her voice. It's not that simple. It seems pretty simple to me. You cancel your agreement with Graves, and the development dies. And then what? I'm stuck with land I don't need, and Graves sues me for breach of contract. So, you have money. You can afford lawyers. It's not about the money. Cole stood up, pacing to the window. If I cancel the agreement, Graves will know I was behind the purchase. He'll figure out that I've been buying distressed properties in the area, and that information will get out. And you'd rather protect your privacy than save your neighbors' ranches. I'd rather not become the county's unofficial bank. Cole's voice rose with frustration. You don't understand what it's like to have money in a community like this. Every family crisis becomes your responsibility. Every failed business becomes something you should have prevented. Every tragedy becomes something you should have been able to fix with a check. Ivy stood up slowly, her face pale with disgust. You're unbelievable. Ivy, no, listen to me. You've spent the last 3 days talking about your guilt over your parents' death, your fear of letting people down, your worry about making other people's problems your responsibility. But what you're really afraid of is being needed. You're terrified that people might actually count on you for something. That's not. It is exactly that. Ivy's voice was shaking with emotion. You'd rather let good families lose everything they've worked for than risk the possibility that they might be grateful to you. You'd rather hide behind your guilt and your fear than step up and be the kind of man your parents raised you to be. Cole felt her words like physical blows. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? I know that you have the power to help people, and you're choosing not to use it. I know that you're willing to let Martin Graves destroy this community because taking action would require you to be vulnerable. And what about you? Cole shot back, his own anger finally surfacing. You're lecturing me about taking action when you can't even make a decision about your own career. You're so scared of failing again that you'd rather stay here and play house than face the possibility that you might not be as good as you used to be. At least I'm not hiding behind money and legal contracts. No, you're just hiding behind other people's kindness. Cole's voice was cruel now, designed to hurt. How long were you planning to stay here, Ivy? How long before my temporary charity case became permanent? The words hit their target. Ivy stepped back as if he'd struck her, her face going white with pain. That's what you think I am? A charity case? Too late. Cole realized he'd gone too far. Ivy, I didn't mean... Yes, you did. Her voice was very quiet now, which was somehow worse than when she'd been shouting. You meant exactly that. She moved toward the door, then paused without turning around. For what it's worth, she said, I was never planning to stay permanently. I just thought foolishly, apparently, that I'd found someone worth taking a risk for. Someone who might actually be worth changing my life for. Ivy, wait, but she was already gone, leaving Cole alone with his property deeds and his carefully constructed walls and the sudden, devastating knowledge that he'd just destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him because he was too much of a coward to be the man she needed him to be. By the time Cole realized what a complete fool he'd been, Ivy was already packed and waiting by the front door for the taxi he'd called to take her to town. She stood there in her thin wool coat, the same one she'd been wearing when he found her by the barn, looking small and fragile and utterly determined to leave. Ivy, please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. Her voice was steady, but Cole could see the hurt in her eyes. You've made your position perfectly clear. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. No, you said things you did mean. Things you've probably been thinking since the day you found me. Ivy picked up her small suitcase. I should thank you, actually. You've reminded me of something important. What's that? That I was right to be wary of depending on other people's kindness. It always comes with a price. Before Cole could respond, they heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Through the window, Cole could see it wasn't the taxi he'd called. It was Sam Henderson's battered pickup truck. Expecting company? Ivy asked. Cole shook his head, already moving toward the door. Sam Henderson climbed out of his truck, followed by Martha, and then by several other people Cole recognized as neighboring ranchers. The group approached the house with the purposeful stride of people who'd come to make a difficult request. Sam, Cole said as he opened the door. What's going on? We need to talk, Cole. Sam's expression was grim. All of us. About Graves and his water rights petition. Cole glanced back at Ivy, who had moved to the living room window to watch the gathering. This isn't a good time. It's the only time we've got, interrupted Mary Peterson, the elderly widow whose husband had died the previous year. The county commissioners are meeting tomorrow to vote on Graves' petition. If we're going to do something, it has to be now. Cole felt trapped between the group of desperate ranchers and Ivy's watching eyes. What do you want from me? Leadership, said Jim Williams, another longtime neighbor. You're the most successful rancher in the county, Cole. People respect you. If you speak against Graves' petition, others will listen. I can't. Can't what? Martha Henderson's voice was sharp with desperation. Can't be bothered to help your neighbors? Can't risk getting involved in community business? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple, Sam replied. Graves is trying to steal water that's belonged to these families for generations. Either you help us fight him, or you stand by and watch him destroy everything our parents and grandparents built. Cole was acutely aware of Ivy listening to every word, seeing him once again faced with a choice between involvement and isolation. He could feel her judgment like a weight on his shoulders. There are legal complexities you don't understand, Cole said finally. Then explain them to us, Mary Peterson demanded. We're not stupid, Cole. We just don't have your resources. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the taxi, its yellow shape pulling up behind the pickup trucks. Cole felt a surge of panic at the sight. Ivy, you don't have to? Yes, I do. She moved toward the door, suitcase in hand. These people need your help, Cole. I hope you'll find the courage to give it to them. Sam Henderson looked between Cole and Ivy with confusion. Ma'am, I'm sorry. We didn't realize you had company. I was just leaving, Ivy replied. But before I go, I want you all to know something. The man you're asking for help, he's better than he thinks he is. He's just forgotten how to believe in himself. She looked directly at Cole then, and he saw forgiveness in her eyes alongside the hurt. Your parents would be proud of the man you've become, Cole, they'd be even prouder of the man you could still choose to be. With that, she walked past the group of ranchers toward the waiting taxi. Cole watched her go, every instinct screaming at him to stop her, to tell her she was right about everything, to beg her not to leave. Instead, he stood frozen on his front porch, watching the taxi drive away with the woman he loved, while his neighbors waited for an answer he wasn't sure he could give. Friend of yours? Sam asked gently. Something like that, Cole replied. His voice rough. Martha Henderson studied his face with the intuition of a woman who'd been married for 37 years. You love her. It wasn't a question, but Cole answered anyway. Yeah, I do. Then why'd you let her leave? Because I'm a coward, Cole said simply. And she deserves better than that. The group of ranchers exchanged glances, understanding passing between them without words. These were people who'd known heartbreak and loss, who'd faced their own moments of choosing between safety and risk. Well, Sam said finally, maybe it's time to stop being a coward. Cole looked at the faces surrounding him, people who'd driven through mud and melting snow to ask for his help, people who'd swallowed their pride to stand on his doorstep and admit they needed him, people who were willing to fight for something they believed in, even when the odds were against them. Tell me about tomorrow's meeting, he said finally. Relief flooded Sam's face. The commissioners meet at 2 o'clock. Graves will present his petition, probably with a team of lawyers and a bunch of fancy charts about economic development. What's our strategy? We don't have one, admitted Jim Williams. We were hoping you might have some ideas. Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, what if we gave them something better than economic arguments? What do you mean? Graves is selling the commissioners on tax revenue and development. What if we showed them what they'd really be losing? Mary Peterson frowned. I don't follow. This community isn't just about individual ranches. It's about a way of life that's been here for generations. It's about families who know each other's names, who help each other through hard times, who preserve something valuable that can't be measured in tax dollars. Martha Henderson's eyes lit up with understanding. You're talking about showing them who we are. I'm talking about reminding them what's worth preserving. Cole's mind was racing now, pieces of a plan falling into place. What if we organized something that demonstrated the value of this community? Something that showed the commissioners that what Graves wants to destroy is worth more than what he wants to build? Like what? Cole thought about Ivy's words, about his mother's music, about the way communities came together in times of crisis. Like a benefit concert. The suggestion surprised them all, including Cole himself. A concert? Sam asked. Why not? We get local musicians, maybe some of the high school kids, set up in someone's barn and invite the whole county. Show people what rural community really looks like. Cole was warming to the idea now. Make it a fundraiser for something everyone can support, maybe. A scholarship fund for local kids. That's not a bad idea, Jim Williams said slowly. But we'd need someone to organize it, someone with music connections. Cole's heart sank as he realized what he'd suggested. The one person who could have helped him pull together a concert in 24 hours was currently in a taxi heading toward town, probably hating him. Never mind, he said. It's a stupid idea. We don't have time to organize something like that. Actually, Martha Henderson said thoughtfully, we might. My daughter teaches music at the high school. She's got contacts throughout the county, and she's been looking for a way to showcase her students. And the Peterson barn would be perfect for something like that, added Mary Peterson. It's big enough, and it's right on the main road where people would see it. Cole felt a flicker of hope. You think we could really pull this together by tomorrow? If we start making calls right now, Sam said. But we'd need someone to coordinate everything, someone who understands both music and event planning. Again, Cole thought of Ivy, of her professional experience, and her understanding of what made a performance work. But Ivy was gone, and she was gone because he'd been too much of a coward to trust her with the truth. I'll do it, he said finally. I'll coordinate the event. The ranchers looked surprised. Cole Harrington volunteering to organize a community event was not something any of them had expected. You sure about that? Sam asked. No, Cole admitted. But I'm sure about wanting to stop Graves. And I'm sure about wanting to help all of you keep your ranches. As the group began making plans, dividing up tasks and phone lists, Cole found himself thinking about Ivy's words. She'd said his parents would be proud of the man he'd become, but prouder of the man he could still choose to be. Maybe it wasn't too late to be that man. Maybe it wasn't too late to fight for something that mattered, even if it meant risking failure. And maybe, if he was very lucky and very brave, it wasn't too late to win back the woman he'd been foolish enough to let walk away 20-4 hours. Later, Cole stood in the Peterson barn watching the most unlikely concert venue come together through the efforts of an entire community. Word had spread faster than wildfire through the county, and by noon, people were arriving with folding chairs, sound equipment, and enough food to feed half of Texas. Martha Henderson's daughter, Sarah, had worked miracles with her music contacts. The high school jazz ensemble was setting up in one corner. A bluegrass band from the next county over was tuning their instruments. And even the church choir had volunteered to perform. It wasn't Carnegie Hall, but it had something more important heart. I can't believe you pulled this together so fast, Sam Henderson said, peering at Cole's elbow with a steaming cup of coffee. I had help, Cole replied, watching as Mary Peterson directed the placement of hay bales that would serve as additional seating. Turns out this community has more organizing power than I gave it credit for. Turns out you've got more leadership in you than you gave yourself credit for, Sam corrected gently. Cole was about to respond when he saw a familiar yellow taxi pulling up the gravel drive. His heart stopped as he watched the passenger door open and Ivy Brenner step out, violin case in hand. She was wearing a simple black dress and her thin wool coat, and she looked every inch the professional musician she was. But what made Cole's breath catch was the expression on her face, determined, focused, and directed straight at him. Excuse me, Cole said to Sam, already moving toward the barn entrance. He met Ivy halfway across the parking area, unsure of what to say, afraid that anything he said would be wrong. You came back, he said finally. Sarah Henderson called me at the bus station in Austin. Said there was a benefit concert happening, and they needed a violinist. Ivy's voice was carefully neutral. I couldn't let them down. Ivy, this isn't about us, Cole. She looked past him at the bustling activity in the barn. This is about doing what's right for these people. Cole nodded, though her words stung. Of course. Thank you for coming. They stood there for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. I should go find Sarah and see where I fit into the program, Ivy said finally. Wait, Cole reached out, stopping, just short of touching her arm. There's something you should know about the county commissioners' meeting. What about it? Graves didn't show up. Ivy's eyes widened. What do you mean he didn't show up? His lawyer called this morning to postpone the hearing indefinitely. Said there were complications with their petition that needed to be resolved. What kind of complications? Cole looked directly at her, needing her to understand. A kind that happen when the person who actually owns the land they want to develop withdraws his consent for the project. Understanding dawned in Ivy's eyes. You canceled your agreement with Graves. I canceled everything. The development contract, the water rights petition, all of it. Cole's voice was rough with emotion. You were right about everything, Ivy. I was hiding behind legal contracts and fear instead of doing what I knew was right. Cole, I called every rancher in the county personally to tell them that their water rights are safe. Then I called my lawyer and had him draft new conservation easements for all the land I own, ensuring it can never be developed. Ivy stared at him, processing the implications. You gave up millions of dollars. I gave up money I never should have pursued in the first place. Cole stepped closer, emboldened by the softness he saw in her eyes. You asked me what my parents would think of the man I'd become. The truth is, they would have been ashamed of the deal I made with Graves. But I think they'd be proud of the choice I made to break it. Even if it costs you financially? Money doesn't keep you warm at night, Ivy. It doesn't make music in empty rooms or help damaged horses learn to trust again. Cole's voice dropped. to almost a whisper. It doesn't love you back when you're brave enough to let someone in. Before Ivy could respond, Sarah Henderson appeared at Cole's shoulder, slightly out of breath from running across the parking lot. Ivy, thank goodness you're here. We've got a full program lined up, and we'd love to have you close the show. Would you be willing to perform something solo? Ivy looked at Sarah, then back at Cole, clearly conflicted. I don't know. I haven't performed solo in months, and you'll be magnificent, Cole said quietly. You were born to make music, Ivy. Don't let fear steal that from you again. The irony of him giving advice about facing fears wasn't lost on either of them, but Ivy seemed to draw strength from his words. All right, she said to Sarah, I'll perform, but I'll need about 20 minutes to warm up and choose a piece. Perfect. The show starts in an hour, and you'll go on last. Sarah beamed at them both. This is going to be amazing. As Sarah hurried away, Cole and Ivy were left alone again in the midst of the organized chaos. What will you play? Cole asked. I'm not sure yet. Something that fits the occasion, I suppose. Ivy hesitated, then said, Cole, about what happened between us? I know you're still angry with me. You have every right to be. I'm not angry anymore, Ivy said softly. I'm just confused. Yesterday you were pushing me away, telling me to take the job in Austin. Today you're canceling million-dollar deals and organizing community concerts. What changed? Cole was quiet for a moment, watching the activity around them, neighbors helping neighbors, a community coming together to celebrate something worth preserving. You did, he said finally. You changed everything. You made me remember who I used to be before I got so afraid of losing people that I stopped letting them get close enough to matter. And now? Now, I want to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you, the kind of man who fights for what's important instead of hiding from it. Ivy's eyes filled with tears she was trying not to shed. Cole, I love you, he said simply. I know I have no right to say that after the way I treated you, but it's the truth. I fell in love with your strength and your music and the way you see possibilities where other people see problems. I love you too, Ivy whispered, and Cole felt his heart stop. You do? I have since the moment you gave me your father's gloves and trusted me with your rescue horses. A tear slipped down her cheek. But love isn't always enough, is it? We both have lives to rebuild, choices to make about who we want to be. Then let's rebuild them together, Cole said, reaching for her hands. Stay, Ivy, not as a charity case or a temporary guest, but as my partner. Help me figure out how to be part of this community instead of apart from it. Help me learn how to trust that loving someone doesn't have to mean losing them. Ivy looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, seeing hope and vulnerability and a love that was strong enough to risk everything. What about my music career? What about it? You can perform anywhere, Ivy. You can teach. You can travel. You can start a music program for local kids. Whatever makes you happy. I just want to be part of whatever you choose. Around them, the concert preparations continued, but Cole and Ivy stood in their own bubble of possibility, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and were brave enough to see where love might lead them. Ask me again after I perform tonight, Ivy said finally. If I can get through a solo performance without falling apart, maybe I'll be ready to take other risks too. Cole squeezed her hands gently. I'll be right here, whatever happens. Promise? Promise, Cole said, and for the first time in 15 years, he meant it completely. The Peterson barn had been transformed into something magical. String lights hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the assembled crowd of nearly 300 people. Folding chairs and hay bales were arranged in neat rows, with families from across the county settling in for an evening of music and community spirit. Cole stood at the back of the barn, watching as act after act took the makeshift stage. The high school jazz ensemble had brought down the house with their rendition of Mac the Knife. The church choir had moved several people to tears with Amazing Grace, and the bluegrass band had gotten half the audience clapping along to Foggy Mountain Breakdown. But all evening, Cole's attention had been focused on Ivy, who sat in the front row with her violin case across her lap, occasionally opening it to check her instrument or tighten her bow. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept taking deep breaths and flexing her fingers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah Henderson announced from the stage, "we're honored to close tonight's program with a very special guest. Ivy Brenner is a classically trained violinist who has performed with symphonies across the country. Tonight, she's graciously agreed to share her gift with us. Please welcome Ivy Brenner." The applause was warm and enthusiastic as Ivy made her way to the stage. Cole held his breath as she adjusted the microphone and opened her violin case with steady hands. "Thank you all for welcoming me into your community," Ivy said, her voice clear and strong. "A few days ago, I found myself stranded in a blizzard, convinced that my life was falling apart. But sometimes what feels like an ending is actually a beginning." She lifted her violin and settled it under her chin, her bow poised above the strings. For a moment, she looked directly at Cole, and he saw both fear and determination in her eyes. This piece is called "The Lark Ascending" by Ralph Vaughan Williams. It's about a bird that rises from the earth into pure song, leaving behind everything that once held it down. The first note floated across the barn like silk, pure and clear and heartbreakingly beautiful. Cole felt his chest tighten as Ivy began to play, her bow dancing across the strings with a grace that spoke of years of training and, more importantly, of a heart that was finally ready to soar again. The melody was ethereal, climbing and falling like the flight of the lark the piece was named for. But there was something else in Ivy's playing that went beyond technical perfection. There was joy, pure and unfiltered, the sound of someone who had rediscovered their love for music after almost losing it completely. Cole wasn't the only one affected by her performance. All around the barn, people sat transfixed, many with tears streaming down their faces. Even the children were silent, instinctively understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. As the piece reached its climactic passages, Ivy's playing became more confident, more free. She closed her eyes and let the music carry her. And Cole could see the exact moment when she stopped performing and started simply being a musician in perfect communion with her art. When the final note faded into silence, the barn erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. People leaped to their feet, calling out their appreciation, and Cole felt his heart swell with pride and love for the woman who had just laid her soul bare for a room full of strangers. But Ivy wasn't finished. As the applause died down, she raised her violin again. "If I may," she said, "I'd like to play one more piece. This one is for someone who taught me that taking risks is worth it when you're surrounded by people who believe in you." She began to play the Chopin Nocturne she'd performed in Cole's mother's music room, but this time it was different. This time it wasn't just a memory of past love, but a promise of future possibilities. The melody soared through the barn, touching every corner and every heart, and Cole felt as if she was speaking directly to him through the music. As the last note faded, Ivy lowered her violin and looked directly at Cole. The message in her eyes was clear. She was ready to take the risk he'd asked her to take. Cole didn't wait for the applause to end. He pushed through the crowd, making his way to the front of the barn as people parted to let him pass. When he reached the stage, Ivy was already stepping down to meet him. He began, but she silenced him by placing her fingers against his lips. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll take the risk. Yes, I'll build a life with you." Ivy's smile was radiant. Yes to everything. Cole swept her into his arms, spinning her around as the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Ivy laughed, giddy with relief and joy. "Besides, where else am I going to find a man who saves broken horses and organizes last-minute benefit concerts? Where else am I going to find a woman who can bring an entire community to tears with her music?" Cole replied, his voice rough with emotion. Around them, people were beginning to approach, wanting to congratulate Ivy on her performance and thank Cole for organizing the evening. But before they were swallowed up by the crowd, Cole had one more thing he needed to say. "I love you, Ivy Brenner." And I promise you won't regret taking this risk. I love you too, Cole Harrington. And I promise I'll remind you of that every day for the rest of our lives. As the community surrounded them with warmth and congratulations, Cole thought about his parents and how proud they would be to see him finally opening his heart to the possibility of love and connection. The music room in his house would never be silent again. The rescue horses would have another person to care for them. And the man who had spent 15 years hiding from life was finally ready to start living it. In the distance, someone had started playing guitar, and other musicians were joining in with an impromptu jam session. The formal concert was over, but the music and the celebration was just beginning. Cole pulled Ivy closer and whispered in her ear, "Ready for the next adventure? With you? I'm ready for anything." And as they danced together in a barn full of friends and neighbors, with Ivy's violin case safely tucked away and a future full of possibilities stretching out before them, Cole finally understood what his mother had meant about music being the language the soul spoke when words weren't enough. Sometimes the most beautiful music wasn't played on instruments at all. Sometimes it was the harmony two hearts made when they finally found their way to each other. 6 months later, the same barn that had hosted their first public declaration of love was being decorated for their wedding. Cole stood at the altar, a simple wooden platform where the stage had been, adjusting his tie and watching his friends and neighbors filled the space with flowers, ribbons, and the same string lights that had created magic on the night Ivy had played her heart out for 300 strangers. "You nervous?" Sam Henderson asked, appearing at Cole's shoulder in his role as best man. "Terrified," Cole admitted with a grin. "But the good kind of terrified." "Martha says that's exactly how I looked on our wedding day," Sam chuckled. 38 years later, I'm still terrified of that woman, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Cole's attention was drawn to the barn entrance, where Ivy appeared in a simple but elegant white dress that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the open doors. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers and wore his mother's pearl necklace, something borrowed that had become something permanent when Cole had given it to her the night he proposed. But what made Cole's breath catch wasn't the dress or the flowers, or even the radiant smile on Ivy's face. It was the way she looked completely at home in this place that had become the center of their community, surrounded by people who had welcomed her not as Cole's girlfriend or fiancé, but as family. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of change for both of them. Ivy had started a music program for local children, teaching violin and piano lessons in Cole's mother's music room, which had become the heart of their home. 3 afternoons a week, the house rang with the sounds of scales and simple melodies as young fingers learned to coax beauty from strings and keys. Cole had thrown himself into community leadership with the same intensity he'd once reserved for building his business empire. He'd organized a cooperative buying program that helped small ranchers get better prices for their cattle, established a loan fund for families facing temporary hardship, and somehow found himself elected to the county commission, a position he'd accepted with Ivy's enthusiastic encouragement. "You ready for this?" the minister asked quietly as Ivy made her way down the aisle, her arm linked with her father's. Her parents had driven down from Alston for the wedding, their relationship with their daughter slowly healing as they saw how happy she'd become. "I've been ready for 6 months," Cole replied, his eyes never leaving Ivy's face. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, with vows they'd written themselves, an exchange of rings that carried more weight than any legal document ever could. Cole's parents' wedding rings carefully resized and polished to a warm gold glow served as both symbol and promise that love could transcend loss, that new beginnings could honor old memories. "I promise to love you through every season," Ivy said as she slipped the ring onto Cole's finger. "Through the storms that will come and the sunshine that follows. I promise to make music with you for the rest of our lives." "I promise to be brave enough to let you love me," Cole replied, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I promise to build a life with you that's worthy of the gift you've given me, the gift of believing in tomorrow again." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the barn erupted in cheers that could probably be heard 3 counties over. But Cole and Ivy only had eyes for each other as they shared their first kiss as a married couple. sealing a bond that had been forged in blizzard, conditions and strengthened by their willingness to take risks for each other. The reception was a community affair, with tables laden with food prepared by every family in the county, and a dance floor that quickly filled with couples young and old. Cole's first dance with his new wife was to the Tennessee Waltz, played by the same bluegrass band that had performed at the benefit concert. "Any regrets?" Cole asked as they swayed together in the center of the barn. "Only one," Ivy replied, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Cole's face fell. "What?" "I regret that it took a blizzard to bring us together. Think of all the time we could have had if we'd met sooner." Cole laughed, relief and love washing over him in equal measure. "I don't know about that. I think we met exactly when we were supposed to, when we were both ready to be found." As the evening wore on, Cole found himself standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching his wife, teaching the Henderson grandchildren a simple waltz step. Her laugh carried across the barn, mixing with the music and the voices of people who had become their family by choice rather than blood. "She's good for you," a voice said beside him, and Cole turned to see Mary Peterson, elegant in a navy blue dress and pearls. "She's good for all of us," Cole replied. "Have you seen how many kids are signed up for her music lessons? 17 at last count, and more asking every week." Mary smiled. "That music room of yours is going to need an addition soon. Already in the works. Ivy wants to add a small performance space so the kids can have recitals." "And you're okay with that? All those people traipsing through your private sanctuary?" Cole considered the question, thinking about how the house that had once been a fortress of solitude had become a place where children laughed and music filled every corner. "It's not private anymore," he said finally. "It's ours. Mine and Ivy's, and anyone else who needs a place to belong." Mary patted his arm gently. "Your parents would be so proud of the man you've become, Cole. But more than that, they'd be happy that you finally learned what they tried to teach you." "What's that?" "That love multiplies when you share it. It doesn't divide or diminish, it grows." As if summoned by their conversation, Ivy appeared at Cole's side, slightly breathless from dancing, but glowing with happiness. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" she asked, slipping her arm around Cole's waist. "Love," Mary said simply, "and how it has a way of transforming everything it touches. Even stubborn ranchers who think they're better off alone?" Ivy teased, looking up at her husband with eyes full of affection. "Especially stubborn ranchers," Cole replied, pulling her closer. "Though I prefer to think of myself as reformed rather than transformed." "Reformed, transformed, whatever you want to call it," Ivy laughed. "You're stuck with me now. Promise?" "Promise." As the last song of the evening played a slow, sweet melody that had half the barn swaying together, Cole thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a man who measured success by the height of the walls he'd built around himself. Tonight, he was surrounded by community, filled with purpose, and married to a woman who had taught him that the bravest thing anyone could do was open their heart and trust that love would be enough. The music wound down, and gradually the guests began to drift away, offering final congratulations and promises to see them soon. Cole and Ivy stood in the doorway of the barn, waving goodbye and thanking everyone for making their day perfect. When the last car had pulled away and they were finally alone, Cole swept Ivy into his arms and carried her across the threshold of the barn, both of them laughing at the absurdity and sweetness of the gesture. "So, Mrs. Harrington," Cole said, as he set her down gently, "ready to start her happily ever after?" "I thought we already had," Ivy replied, straightening his tie and smiling up at him. "The day a stubborn rancher decided to save a frozen violinist and ended up saving himself instead. Best decision I ever made. Mine, too." And as they walked hand in hand toward the house that had become their home, with stars overhead and music still echoing in their hearts, Cole finally understood that sometimes the most beautiful endings were actually beginnings in disguise, and that love, when it was real and brave and true, could indeed last forever.